The curator's gambit Victoria Blackwood stood before the gilded mirror in her penthouse dressing room, applying the final stroke of crimson lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. The color matched the vintage Valentino gown that hugged her. Figure like liquid fire, a stark departure from the understated blacks and grays she typically wore to gallery openings. Tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just the respected curator of the Metropolitan Modern Art Museum. Tonight, she was a woman with nothing left to lose. The invitation to the Whitmore Gallery's grand opening lay discarded on her marble vanity, its elegant script mocking her with familiar names. Mr. and Mrs. James Blackwood cordially invited. How quaint, how traditional, how utterly obsolete. 3 weeks had passed since she'd discovered the texts on James's phone. 3 weeks since she'd learned that her husband of 12 years had been financing more than just his latest tech startup with their joint accounts. The young PR executive, barely 25 with ambitious eyes and flexible morals, had been enjoying expensive dinners, designer handbags, and weekend getaways to the Hamptons, all funded by the fortune Victoria had helped build through her connections in the art world. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She had introduced James to half the collectors who now invested in his ventures. Her reputation, her relationships, her careful cultivation of Manhattan's cultural elite had been the foundation of his success. And this was how he repaid her trust. Victoria fastened a necklace of black pearls around her throat, each one a perfect sphere of compressed time and pressure. Much like herself, she mused. Tonight's opening was particularly significant. James was unveiling his partnership with the Whitmore Gallery's new digital art initiative, a revolutionary platform that would merge traditional collecting with blockchain technology. It was his biggest triumph yet, and he'd planned to announce it with his little protege by his side, introducing her to society as his new creative consultant. The thought made Victoria's lips curve into something that wasn't quite a smile. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the guest list Marcus Whitmore had sent her earlier. Every name was familiar, every face a piece on the chessboard she was about to play. The mayor's wife, 3 members of the City Planning Commission, the president of Manhattan Trust Bank, and most importantly, Thomas Reginald from the Securities Exchange Commission. Thomas, who had been trying to get his daughter into Columbia's art history program for 2 years. Thomas, whose investigation into suspicious cryptocurrency transactions had been making waves in certain circles. The elevator descended silently to the lobby, where her driver waited beside the black Mercedes. As they glided through the city, streets toward the gallery district, Victoria reviewed the contents of her evening bag. Inside the vintage Chanel clutch lay a small digital tablet, its memory filled with bank statements, transaction records, and a series of very compromising photographs taken by a private investigator with excellent telephoto capabilities. The Whitmore Gallery blazed with light against the October darkness, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the glittering crowd within. Victoria recognized the scene immediately as a study in power dynamics and social architecture. The young and hungry clustered near the bar, desperate to be noticed. The established collectors held court in comfortable corners, dispensing wisdom and judgment in equal measure. And there, at the center of it all, was James. He looked magnificent, she had to admit. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom tuxedo fitting his athletic frame like a second skin. Beside him stood the girl, Natasha something. Victoria couldn't be bothered to remember her full name. Resplendent in an emerald gown that had undoubtedly cost more than most people's annual salary, they were surrounded by admirers, basking in congratulations for the digital platform that would supposedly revolutionize art ownership. James's laugh carried across the room, rich and confident, the sound of a man who believed himself untouchable. Victoria paused at the entrance, allowing the moment to crystallize. In a few minutes, she would walk into that gallery and begin the most important exhibition of her career. Not a show of paintings or sculptures, but a carefully curated display of truth, betrayal, and consequences. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the steady rhythm of inevitability. The game was about to begin. Part 2. The Collector's Wager Marcus. Whitmore adjusted his bow tie for the third time in 10 minutes, a nervous habit that betrayed the composed exterior he projected to his guests. From his position near the main exhibition wall, he had a perfect view of the gallery entrance and had been watching for Victoria's arrival with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. When she finally appeared framed in the doorway like a vision, in crimson silk, Marcus felt his breath catch. In the 15 years he'd known Victoria Blackwood, he had never seen her look more dangerous or more beautiful. The transformation was complete. Gone was the reserved curator who spoke in measured tones about artistic merit and historical significance. In her place stood a woman who radiated power and purpose. Marcus had built his reputation on reading people, on understanding what drove collectors to obsess over particular pieces. It was a skill that had made him one of the most successful gallery owners in the city. Tonight, he recognized the look in Victoria's eyes. It was the same expression he'd seen on the faces of his most ruthless clients when they spotted a piece they absolutely had to possess, regardless of cost. The difference was that tonight, Victoria wasn't hunting for art. She was hunting for justice. Their partnership had begun 3 weeks ago over coffee at a small cafe in Soho. Victoria had called him, her voice steady despite what he now knew must have been tremendous emotional turmoil, and asked to meet. She'd laid out James's betrayal with clinical precision, showing him bank records and photographs that painted a damning picture of financial infidelity. But Marcus's interest hadn't been purely altruistic. James Blackwood had been circling his gallery for months, making inquiries about acquisition, dropping hints about a potential buyout. Marcus had built the Whitmore Gallery from nothing, transforming it into one of Manhattan's premier showcases for emerging artists. The thought of James swooping in with his tech money and soulless corporate approach made Marcus's skin crawl. "He wants to turn art into cryptocurrency," Victoria had said, stirring her cappuccino with mechanical precision. "He sees beauty as nothing more than ones and zeros, something to be tokenized and traded like pork belly futures." That's when Marcus had proposed their alliance. James would get his grand opening, his moment of triumph. But he would also get something he wasn't expecting, a masterclass in consequence, curated by two people who understood that some things were worth more than money. Now, watching Victoria move through the crowd with predatory grace, Marcus felt a familiar thrill. It was the same sensation he experienced when orchestrating a particularly complex auction, when multiple bidders were being played against each other in an intricate dance of desire and deception. He excused himself from a conversation with a minor politician's wife and began his own careful navigation of the room. His first stop was Thomas Reginald, the SEC investigator who was examining a particularly abstract piece near the back wall. "Fascinating work," Marcus said, joining him. "The artist calls it hidden structures. It's about the patterns we don't see, the frameworks that exist beneath the surface of things we take for granted." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Rather like financial systems, I imagine. You'd be amazed how much can be hidden in plain sight if you know how to layer the complexity properly." "Indeed," Marcus replied, allowing a meaningful pause. "Speaking of complex structures, I believe my colleague Victoria Blackwood was hoping to speak with you this evening. Something about her expertise in authentication and provenance verification. She's been doing some fascinating research lately." Across the room, Marcus watched James and Natasha holding court near the centerpiece of the evening's exhibition, a large digital display showcasing the new blockchain platform. James was gesturing expansively, explaining how each piece of art would be assigned a unique digital signature, creating an immutable record of ownership and transaction history. Complete transparency, James was saying to a small circle of potential investors. No more questions about authenticity, no more concerns about provenance, everything tracked from creation to sale. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. James was advocating for absolute transparency in art while living a life built on deception and hidden accounts. The man was either supremely confident or supremely stupid. Marcus suspected it was a dangerous combination of both. He spotted Helena, cross near the champagne station, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her black Armani gown understated but unmistakably expensive. Helena was James's primary business partner in the digital initiative, and according to Victoria's research, she was also completely unaware of how her investment money was being used to fund James's extramarital activities. Marcus approached. Helena, with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent decades managing the egos and appetites of the wealthy. "Helena, darling, you look absolutely radiant tonight. James must be thrilled to have such a sophisticated partner for this venture." The artist's vision, Celeste Moreau, stood in the shadows of the gallery's east wing, observing the elaborate theater unfolding before her with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying tribal rituals. The guests moved in predictable patterns, the wealthy circulating in tight orbits around power, the ambitious hovering at the periphery like moths drawn to flame, the truly dangerous ones remaining perfectly still while others came to them. Celeste understood dangerous stillness. For the past month, she had been the gallery's invisible collaborator, the mysterious artist whose latest installation had drawn whispered speculation from critics and collectors alike. Her piece, titled Digital Decay, occupied the entire west wall, a massive multimedia work that appeared to be a celebration of technological progress, but was actually something far more subversive. At first glance, the installation looked like a tribute to the digital age. Screens of various sizes displayed flowing streams of code, cryptocurrency transactions, and digitized artworks that morphed and shifted in mesmerizing patterns. Beautiful, clean, modern. But Celeste had embedded something else within the piece, something that would only reveal itself at the precise moment when the evening's true purpose was unveiled. She watched Victoria Blackwood with professional admiration. The woman moved through the gallery like a master curator arranging an exhibition, positioning each element with calculated precision. Thomas Reginald and his government colleagues were now clustered together, examining something on Victoria's tablet with increasing intensity. James continued his presentation, oblivious to the storm gathering behind him. But Celeste's attention wasn't solely focused on the evening's main drama. She had her own reasons for being here, her own score to settle with James Blackwood. 3 years ago, she had been a struggling digital artist trying to break into the contemporary art scene. James had approached her with a proposition. He would fund a series of her works and help her gain gallery representation in exchange for certain favors. The relationship had lasted 6 months. James had indeed opened doors for her, but the price had been her dignity and nearly her sanity. When she'd finally ended things, he'd systematically destroyed her reputation, calling in favors to have her works removed from upcoming shows, spreading whispers about her professionalism and mental stability. Celeste had disappeared from the New York art scene for 2 years, rebuilding herself in obscurity, learning new techniques, developing her voice. When Marcus Whitmore had approached her about contributing to tonight's exhibition, she'd recognized the opportunity for what it was, a chance to reclaim her narrative and expose the man who had tried to bury her talent. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. 15 minutes. Are you ready? Celeste typed back. Born ready. She made her way toward the main crowd, her black silk jumpsuit allowing her to blend seamlessly with the gallery staff. As she moved, she activated a small remote hidden in her palm. Across the room, her installation began to change. The flowing code on the screen started to coalesce into recognizable patterns: bank routing numbers, account balances, transaction histories. What had appeared to be abstract digital art was actually a real-time display of financial data, pulled from blockchain records and cryptocurrency exchanges. James was still speaking, gesturing toward a screen that displayed his company's proposed digital authentication system. Complete transparency in every transaction, immutable records that cannot be altered or falsified. As if summoned by his words, Celeste's installation began to highlight specific transactions: payments to shell companies, transfers to accounts. In the Cayman Islands, a pattern of financial movement that told a very specific story about how investor money had been redirected to fund personal expenses. Helena Cross was the first to notice. She had been listening to James's presentation, while occasionally glancing at the multimedia display behind him. Suddenly, her expression changed. She recognized some of those account numbers. They were supposed to be holding her investment capital for the digital platform development. "James," she said, her voice cutting through his presentation like a blade through silk. "James, darling, could you pause for a moment?" The entire room turned toward Helena, sensing the shift in atmosphere like animals before an earthquake. Helena's smile was razor-sharp as she gestured toward Celeste's installation. "I'm curious about this fascinating piece behind you. It seems to be displaying some very interesting financial data. Real financial data." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had built her own fortune through careful attention to detail and an absolute intolerance for deception. James turned to look at the screens, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, pure terror. The installation was now displaying a complete map of his financial indiscretions, every hidden account and questionable transaction laid bare in beautiful, high-definition detail. Celeste stepped forward, no longer content to remain in the shadows. "It's called digital decay," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent gallery. "It's about how technology can reveal truth just as easily as it can conceal it. How transparency, when properly applied, can expose the rot beneath a beautiful surface." She looked directly at James, her dark eyes holding his terrified gaze. "The blockchain doesn't lie, Mr. Blackwood. Every transaction is recorded, every movement of digital currency tracked and verified. Your own technology betrays your secrets." Natasha, who had been standing beside James throughout his presentation, suddenly seemed to realize that her future was crumbling in real time. The color drained from her face as she began to understand that her wealthy benefactor wasn't just married, he was also a criminal. Victoria Blackwood chose that moment to step forward, her crimson gown making her look like an avenging angel. In the gallery's stark white space, in her hand, she held the tablet that had been capturing so much attention. "I believe," she said, her voice calm and steady, "that Mr. Reginald from the Securities Exchange Commission might be very interested in cross-referencing these blockchain records with the investment documents you filed for your digital platform initiative." The silence in the gallery was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the barely perceptible sound of James Blackwood's world falling apart. Part 4. The Patron's Price. Helena Cross had built her fortune by recognizing inflection points, those critical moments when circumstances shifted and smart people chose sides. Standing in the Whitmore Gallery, watching her business partner's financial crimes displayed like an avant-garde art piece, she knew she was facing the most important decision of her career. The crowd around them had gone silent. 100 pairs of eyes darting between James's ashen face and the damning evidence scrolling across Celeste's installation. Helena could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Everyone knew she was James's primary investor. They were waiting to see if she would stand by him or cut him loose. Helena had survived 3 recessions, 2 divorces, and a dozen. Corporate takeovers by maintaining one unwavering principle: never let loyalty override self-preservation. Tonight would be no exception. "Mr. Reginald," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with crystalline clarity, "I believe we need to have a very serious conversation." She stepped away from James, putting physical distance between herself and the man she now realized had been systematically defrauding her. Each step was calculated, deliberate, a public demonstration that Helena Cross was nobody's fool. Thomas Reginald moved toward her with the purposeful stride of a federal investigator who had just been handed a career-making case. "Ms. Cross, I think that would be very wise." Helena opened her purse and pulled out her own tablet, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the screen. "I've been tracking our joint accounts rather closely," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire gallery to hear. "I began having concerns about certain expenditures several weeks ago." The crowd pressed closer, no longer pretending to examine the artwork. This was better than any exhibition. This was the real-time destruction of one of Manhattan's most prominent power couples, orchestrated with surgical precision. "You see," Helena continued, her eyes never leaving James's horrified face, "when someone proposes revolutionary transparency in blockchain technology while simultaneously hiding cryptocurrency transactions from his business partners, it raises certain questions about character." She handed her tablet to Reginald, whose eyebrows rose as he scrolled through her findings. Helena had been conducting her own investigation for weeks, long before Victoria had contacted Marcus about tonight's exhibition. The difference was that Helena had been planning to handle the matter quietly, through lawyers and financial audits. She hadn't expected to have her concerns validated so spectacularly in front of New York's cultural elite. James finally found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a croak. "Helena, you don't understand. Those transactions were legitimate. Business expenses. The accounting firm can explain." "Which accounting firm would that be, James?" Helena's smile was arctic. "Peterson and Associates, who filed your official investment reports? Or the boutique firm in the Cayman Islands that's been handling your creative bookkeeping?" The masterpiece. Revealed Victoria Blackwood stood at the center of the gallery like a conductor preparing to deliver the crescendo of a complex symphony. Everything that had happened tonight, the financial revelations, Helena's betrayal, Celeste's artistic exposé, had been carefully orchestrated movements leading to this moment. She reached into her crimson clutch and withdrew a small velvet box, the kind typically used for jewelry. But instead of diamonds or pearls, it contained a single USB drive, its surface gleaming under the gallery's pristine lighting. "For 12 years, Victoria began, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room, "I played the role of the perfect corporate wife. I smiled at dinner parties, organized charity events, and never asked inconvenient questions about late nights at the office." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of Manhattan's elite, many of whom had attended those very dinner parties, had benefited from those charity events, had watched her perfect performance without ever seeing the woman beneath. "The facade. But here's what none of you realized," she continued, holding up the USB drive like a precious artifact. "I never stopped being a curator, and curators, by nature, are collectors of truth." James, who had been standing frozen in horror since his financial crimes were revealed, suddenly seemed to understand that his humiliation was far from over. "Victoria, whatever you think you know—" "I know everything, James." Her voice cut through his desperate protest with surgical precision. "I know about the 17 different women you've had affairs with over the past decade. I know about the bribes you paid to secure the Midtown Development contract. I know about the environmental reports you falsified for the Hudson River Project." Each revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. These weren't just personal betrayals. They were criminal conspiracies that implicated some of the most powerful people in the city. Victoria could see recognition dawning on several faces, important men and women who had been James's partners in various questionable ventures. But most importantly, Victoria continued, savoring the moment like a fine wine, I know about the Meridian Foundation. The reaction was immediate and electric. The Meridian Foundation was supposedly a charitable organization focused on arts education, but everyone in the room knew it was actually a sophisticated money laundering operation used by the city's wealthy elite to hide income and avoid taxes. Helena Cross, who had been basking in her moral superiority just moments before, went pale. She was one of Meridian's largest contributors. So were at least a dozen other people in the room, including 2 city council members and the museum's board chairman. Thomas Reginald's eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. The SEC had been investigating Meridian for months without success. If Victoria had evidence of its true operations, she was handing him the case that would define his career. The USB drive contains 12 years of documentation, Victoria announced. Financial records, email correspondence, photographs from private meetings, everything I collected while playing the devoted wife who was never supposed to be paying attention. Marcus Whitmore stepped forward, his role as host finally giving way to open admiration for Victoria's masterpiece of revenge. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice filled with genuine awe, I present to you the most significant exhibition of our time, a comprehensive retrospective of corruption, betrayal, and consequence curated by the incomparable Victoria Blackwood. The crowd began to shift nervously as people realized they might be implicated in Victoria's evidence. Conversations started breaking out in urgent whispers as partners tried to assess their exposure and plan their damage control. Celeste Moreau watched the chaos unfold with artistic satisfaction. Her installation continued to display the financial data, but now it had evolved, incorporating news feeds and social media posts as word of the scandal began to spread beyond the gallery walls. Natasha, realizing that her association with James made her a liability rather than an asset, began edging toward the exit. But Victoria's voice stopped her. Oh, Natasha, dear, you shouldn't leave so early. After all, you're featured quite prominently in my collection. Victoria smiled with predatory warmth. Particularly the photographs from last weekend's getaway to Martha's Vineyard. The ones where you're wearing that lovely diamond bracelet. The one James purchased with money stolen from the Children's Hospital Renovation Fund. The revelation that James had stolen from a children's hospital was the final straw. Even in a room full of morally flexible people, there were lines that couldn't be crossed. The crowd's murmur turned into an angry buzz, and several guests began moving away from James as if he were radioactive. James himself seemed to have aged 10 years in the span of an hour. The confident tech mogul who had entered the gallery as a king was now a broken man facing federal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete social exile. Why? He asked Victoria, his voice barely above a whisper. Why now? Why like this? Victoria stepped closer to her husband, close enough that only he could hear her final words to him. Because, darling, she said, her voice soft and deadly, you forgot that I'm not just your wife. I'm the best curator in the city, and tonight I've curated your destruction. She turned away from him and walked toward Thomas Reginald, the USB drive extended like an offering. I believe this belongs to the people of New York, she said. As the federal investigator took the drive and James Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, Victoria Blackwood stood triumphant in her gallery of broken promises, surrounded by the wreckage of lives built on lies. The woman in red had kept her promise. She had created a masterpiece that would be remembered long after the paintings on the walls were forgotten. And as the guests filtered out into the October night, their phones buzzing with urgent calls from lawyers and crisis managers, Victoria allowed herself a smile of perfect satisfaction. The exhibition was complete.